did you enjoy yesterday? Did you write down in the journal the things that you learned? Was it a surprise to find out the history of how as a nation we screwed up the advice that we give around food? Today I wanted to discuss two things with you: habits and homeostasis. Now, don't worry if you don't know what homeostasis is yet. It's, as some people actually call it, the H day. I remember Julie saying to me that she found today probably the most fascinating of all. Now, I'm sure you're going to love it too. And by the way, well done for sticking with the course so far. I mean, you're doing really, really brilliantly. You're setting some real concrete foundations that are going to help you lose that weight for good this time. I promise. But before we get going today, I want to establish a mantra with you for this reset. Aristotle said that the pursuit of happiness and the avoidance of pain is a first principle, for it is the sake of this that we do all that we do. Now stop and think about that for a second. Does that feel right as a guiding mantra? What about adding to it the Americans' Declaration of Independence, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? If we combine the two together, we get life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the avoidance of pain. Now, how does that sound? Who wouldn't want that as a mantra? A long life, feeling free to choose what we do, being happy and avoiding pain. However, I don't want to have any negative words in our mantra, so let's change avoiding pain to putting life into yours. And personally, I don't like the word liberty. I prefer the word freedom. So now we have freedom, happiness, and adding life to yours. How does that sound? You like the sound of that? Good, that's great. Let's use that then as our mantra. And one more thing. America's Declaration of Independence provided the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'm going to demonstrate to you throughout this course that neither America or Britain today currently have any of those three. Why? Well, life is actually getting shorter, not longer. Yes, our life expectancy in Great Britain is now on the decrease. And liberty, freedom, well, we don't have any freedom because the big food companies have stolen our freedom. And happiness, well, depression's on the rise. And few people really have true happiness because they're constantly in a pursuit of too much pleasure. And by the way, the World Health Organization say that there are over 264 million people who now suffer from depression. And in America, 1 in 4 middle-aged women are on antidepressant drugs. What causes depression? Well, it's a hormonal imbalance. And there we go again, back to those hormones again. So to achieve freedom, happiness, and to add life to your years, we need to create some new habits. Remember learning to ride a bike or to drive a car? How at first you have to really think about the order of everything. You have to turn the key and you have to think about putting it into gear and then slowly releasing the clutch and so on. But eventually everything becomes natural, doesn't it? Everything becomes automatic. Well, this health reset is very similar. At first, you're going to have to make conscious decisions, but given time, everything eventually becomes second nature. We have to get your health habits onto autopilot because actually, autopilot is what a habit is. And as Aristotle once said, we are what we constantly do. And in fact, he went on to say, excellence is not an act, but a habit. Now, they say there are 5 phases of creating a healthy habit. The first, they often say, is pre-contemplation, the denial phase. Then we enter contemplation phase. If you like to think about it, that's where we start to shape and realize that we need to change our habits. Then we get into the preparation area. In fact, you bought this course, so you're already on phase 3. And then number 4, action. That's the off phase. You're going, you're up, and you're running. And that's kind of where you are right now. And then once you've created a new habit, then you have the maintenance phase. And basically, once you've created it, that's you getting on with life. Then all you have to do is stick to your new habits. Now, some people actually say there are 7 steps, and that is after the maintenance phase, then occasionally you're going to relapse. That's a bit where you go, hey, I'm looking really good, so let's just have that one beer or that one pizza. Then after relapsing, stage 7, they call it the recover phase. You see your relapse as research, if you like, and you get back to maintenance. I know this all might sound a bit complicated and steps and procedures, but it's important to understand that there's a sort of written down law, if you like, of how you form a habit and how, if you relapse, how you recover. And remember back to day 1, I said it's never about willpower. You see, self-control and willpower can only be very much in the short term a strategy. It will never work in the long term. When it comes to food, self-control simply cannot work in the long run. The more you deprive your brain of something, the bigger that craving will become. And living a life of depriving yourself is not a happy place or even a healthy place to be. What we got to do is change what it is you desire, change your habits. Does that make sense? Now, one of the reasons willpower and restraint don't work is that self-control in itself is not satisfying. Here is something crucial to understand. Habits always have a reward at the end. This is critical to understand if we're to break your old habits and establish some new ones. Habits always have rewards, or at least perceived rewards. And a reward is an outcome that satisfies a craving. Simply trying to inhibit a desire invariably fails. Resisting a craving or trying to cut down on something that you enjoy, that's doomed to failure. What you have to do is replace the habits with something equally satisfying, equally rewarding. A habit is something we once deliberately chose to do, to participate in, but now it happens without thought. The brain does it subconsciously, normally every day. And if you remember back to what we talked about on day 1, where Dr. Brian Wansink suggested that we made 200 decisions about eating every day, yet 90% of those decisions were made subconsciously. They are effectively your food habits. This book, Atomic Habits, it's a life-changing million-copy bestseller, and I'm going to recommend that you read this at the end of the resource. In here, James, the author, says, habit formation is incredibly useful because the conscious mind is the bottleneck of the brain. He goes on to say that the brain can only pay attention to one problem at a time. And as a result, your brain is always working to preserve your conscious attention for whatever task is most essential. Whenever possible, the conscious mind likes to offload tasks to the non-conscious mind to do it automatically. This is precisely what happens when a habit is formed. Habits reduce the cognitive load and free up the mental capacity so you can allocate your attention to other things. Now let's hear from a real good friend of mine, the brilliant Eric Edemeades. Now he runs a really successful business called Get Wild Fit, and I'll put a mention of that at the back of your journal.
You have your conscious mind, and we only live in that conscious mind for a few % of the day. The rest of the time, we're really running some form of autopilot. And as long as we are running on autopilot, then it really serves the food manufacturers to advertise to our subconscious so that our autopilot makes the decisions they want it to make. And that's why somebody will make a conscious decision, often on December 31st, that they're now going to turn their diet around, and they'll be able to consciously hold on with willpower for hours, sometimes, or maybe even days, or maybe weeks. And then what happens is the body will take over, especially if they've made the mistake of doing one of these ridiculous, like exercise your calories away, or even count your calorie rubbish, right? Then now the person's in calorie deficit, the body's going, holy crap, we're starving. And the hungrier you get, the more flexible your food rules become. The body simply takes over. Exactly the same as I said before. Hold your breath. Somewhere around the 2-minute mark, if you can even get there, the body's going to take over. And so that's what happens to a lot of us now, is we go on a diet, and then what happens to us is we use willpower, and then the body takes over and it returns to norm. So what we have to start doing is retraining the subconscious. We have to be looking at the patterns that were created in our childhood, like you fell down, you skinned your knee, you were crying, Your parents would do anything to distract you from your pain. They come over and they gave you a milk dud or a chocolate chip cookie, and you were like, oh my God, I'm no longer in tears, plus I feel loved. And you wonder why at 45 years old, you want to grab that cookie because it's going to help you to feel loved.
Things generally start to become a habit once you start craving the rewards if you don't perform the habit. Now, habits are a 3-stage process, and they always work in exactly the same way. You start with a cue, you conduct the act itself, the action, and then you get the reward. To remember this, just remember how driving a car is almost a habit. You don't think about it, you just change gear, you just do it, it just becomes a habit. And I mention a car because if you break those letters down, the acronym is exactly the same, C-A-R. A habit is a cue, an action, and a reward. Let's look at those in more detail. You get the cue, or what some people call the trigger. You then conduct the habit, the action part, the doing part, and then you get the reward. Or back to yesterday, the pleasure, or at least the perceived pleasure. Now here's something interesting. Just the anticipation of the reward, the anticipation of the pleasure, is enough for the brain to crave the food, the booze, the cigarettes, or whatever it is. And as we heard yesterday, researchers have found that 100% of an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens is activated during desire, yet only 10% of that same structure is activated during the participation. In fact, if you think back to holidays, it's often the thinking about the holiday and the dreaming of it and getting excited about it often is more enlightening and more enjoyable than the actual event itself. Here's Eric again talking to me about this very thing.
The minute you go, I'm having a whiskey, you start producing serotonin and dopamine. You start feeling good. Now listen, I don't know what experimentations you might have done as a child, but there's certain drugs that if you have them, they make food taste yummy. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but serotonin and dopamine are like that. So you have some rebellion. You go, I'm gonna have the whiskey. You produce serotonin and dopamine. Then you drink the whiskey. The whiskey tastes better than it really does because you're high on your own drugs. And in a Pavlovian dog sense, you link the whiskey to the good feelings you're having when the whiskey had nothing to do with the good feelings. The entire food industry and the diet industry is built on that relationship.
How do you lose weight? Well, you need to begin to consciously make all of your food choices and then create new habits. And the easiest way to do this, according to study after study, is to have a plan of how to deal with your old habits when your desire, when you're wanting, when your cravings kick in. Okay, this is where it gets exciting. What we have to figure out is what reward, or what perceived reward, what perceived pleasure is driving your current eating habits. We need to know what causes your nucleus accumbens to go into a frenzy. And only by self-diagnosing your eating habits can we change your relationship with food for good. Now, what I'm going to do today is to help you understand in plain English the neurology of habits. And here's an important thing to understand. It's the cue and the reward that influence how habits function, not the actual thing that you're eating. The main reason why I insist you don't change what you eat for those first 2 weeks is so that together we can really analyze what's driving your current habits. We've got to look out for what all those cues are. Then, after you've eaten what you've eaten, we've got to look at what your brain perceives the reward to be. And often it takes a while to discover what the real cues are. You have to bring it all to the fore and really analyze what it is, the actual cues, the actual triggers, the actual catalysts that gets you to go and eat those foods. And by the way, this bit's great fun, and I'm going to ask you to break it all down and write it into your journal. I've added 20 of these pages in your journal, and every time this week you go to eat something, I want you to write it down and write down what the actual cue was. Was it the time of day? Was it a social situation? Did you feel hungry? Was it just convenient? Or did you see an advert? Or did you see somebody eating something or somebody offered you something? What we've got to do is analyze in real detail what your own personal cues are to the food that you eat. Then I want you to eat that food as you always have done. Whether that be a big plate of pasta, a sandwich, a chocolate bar, a can of Coke, whether it be a McDonald's. The only change I would ask you to make this week, and it's the only change, is that every time you eat something or drink something, you really analyze what is going on and write it down in your journal. I also want you to write down what you believe the reward was. Was it relaxation? Did it make you feel good? Did it fill your stomach up and make you feel happier? Whatever it is, I want you to write it down. And remember, habits are normally unconscious decisions. But what you've got to do for the first 2 weeks is make them really conscious. And to do that, please, please, please do fill in your journal. So as you can see in the journal, we're going to look at the cue first of all. What made you eat that sandwich? Was it the fact that you drive past the same garage on the way home or walk past the same fast food restaurant on the way to the office? Maybe the cue wasn't any of those. Maybe you were feeling a little depressed and you reached out for that chocolate bar. Whatever it is that is the cue, the more you can write down and analyze it, the quicker we'll get to changing your habits. Then look at the top of the chart, the action. That's the easy bit. What was it that you did? You just write in there, chocolate bar, can of Coke, McDonald's, KFC, whatever you want, whatever you're eating, just write in there the action bit. And now the really complicated bit. I want you to write down your feelings as you were eating it and after you were eating it. And try and analyze what the reward was that you got from eating that food. And you might at first go, well, there was no reward. But let me tell you, there is always a reward or perceived reward of some kind. Even if that reward is, let's say you were truly hungry. Well, the reward would be that you felt full. Or let's say that you went to the canteen at work, you had a sandwich, you sat down with your friends. You might start to realize the reward had nothing to do with the food, but just that social interaction with your friends. But the key thing is this. You need to, all this week, fill these in because you're going to be very surprised at what the actual cues are, as in what triggers you to eat the food, and actually what the rewards are or what the perceived rewards are. Now, a week on Monday, if you look at the following charts in your journal, what we're going to then do is when you get the cue, that trigger, we're going to look at substituting the action, substituting the actual thing that you eat to see if we can deliver a similar or same reward. The replacement, the different action, it might be a different type of food, or it might not be. It might be going for a walk. It might even be that rather than eating something, it might be that you phone a friend or a relative just for a chat. But what we will always be aiming to do is to try and keep the reward at the end the same. You see, for everlasting weight loss and for you to change your relationship with food for good, we can't necessarily change all of the cues. And when you receive them, we mustn't actually even change the rewards. What we need to do is simply replace the action in between. Now let's just recap a little bit. Habits are simply behaviors that have been repeated enough times that they become automatic. The sandwich for lunch, the cereal for breakfast, the McDonald's on a Saturday afternoon. It didn't start that way. You first had the McDonald's because you got a cue of some kind, you ate it and you felt a certain way, and then bang, that certain feeling of reward felt good. And your brain registered that reward. Why? Well, it's nature. It had to. It had to at least create a perceived reward or a placebo. If it didn't, we would never have survived as a species. It's all part of survival. You see, the cue may have been a berry on the tree for our primal ancestors, and their brains needed to record that cue so that next time they saw the berry, they would go and eat it and therefore survive. It's all part of survival. Your brain catalogs these events so that the next time you get the same cue, the same big M sign outside of McDonald's, Ronald's smiley face, it's that same looking store, and bang, your brain instantly knows that you crave it, that you felt good last time, and it sends a rush to the brain that says, I must go and eat it. And right now, let me tell you, you're pretty powerless to resist. And right now, until the end of week 2, as I keep saying, I don't want you to resist, I just want you to record. Right now, if you were to resist, you won't get everlasting change that you want. It will reduce your chances of long-term success. What we've got to do right now is analyze these habits of yours and bring them to the fore. Effectively, your habits are stored behaviors leading to certain rewards. They are shortcuts learnt by your previous experiences. A habit is just a memory of the steps that you previously took to solve a problem in the past. And what do I mean by solving a problem? Well, nearly all habits are formed to solve a problem. That is how your body is wired. And the big food companies, well, they know this. Hunger, stress, anxiety. Your McDonald's habit formed because your body felt it needed feeding. Just like a smoker's habit forms because the smoker believes it relaxes him. While I'm on this, the smoker really feels relaxed, not because of the cigarette, but because of that big breath he or she takes while inhaling. It's just a shame that the smoker doesn't realize this. In fact, later in the reset, we're going to hear from the author of The Oxygen Advantage about the benefits of breathing in a certain way. I mention this now because some people have done this reset. When they receive a certain cue, have found that by replacing the action of eating with LSD, no, I'm only joking. Well, actually, yes, LSD. Not the LSD you're thinking of. But when they get that cue for food, if they replace it simply with low, slow, deep breathing, and all of that in through the nose and not the mouth, they find it sometimes sufficient enough a reward, that relaxation, to actually replace the action of eating the food with long, slow, deep breathing. Let me summarize habits right now. Habits are a 3-step process. They start with a cue or a trigger, which create a craving, which then motivates you into action, which then provides a reward or perceived reward at the end. Over the rest of this week and next week, I want you to listen to your internal dialogue. I want you to listen to the tricks and the tools that your primal part of your brain uses. And we're going to talk about this a lot more tomorrow. I want you to have a conversation with yourself about the food, and I want you to make observations and write them down and fill in the habit loop inside of your journal. I want you to add your feelings. I want you to write in the feelings about how you felt the second you decided to eat the food. I want you to write down your feelings about how you felt as you actually saw the food for the first time. And then your feelings about how you tasted it and what it tasted like. I also want to know what your feelings were after eating it, both immediately and then hours or even the next day. I've written things down in my journal in the past. For example, by writing them down, I realized for ice cream, which was really still a big hang-up for me, even when I got my health back on track. By writing it down, I realized that ice cream was nostalgic eating for me, and it was probably associated with the reward I got as a child, because I always remember my parents saying to me, eat all your dinner and then you can have the ice cream. So ice cream itself became a nostalgic reward. I want you to measure your feelings, like say, both before the meal or the food, and then the second you decide to have it. What did it really taste like? How did it feel afterwards? What about the next morning? Did you feel bloated? Was you happy with yourself for eating that meal? How did you sleep? Did you sleep well? What did your skin look like? I want to write down all the results of everything that you're eating. Hopefully, you're getting the idea of all this habit stuff now. Please do fully engage with your journal. We've really got together to better understand what it is that's driving your current eating habits.
I asked Dr. Linda Shaw, author of a brilliant book called Your Brain is Boss, for her opinions on how we change our habits.
One has to identify what one's doing. And I think that's the hardest bit. We know that habits are soft-wired because they're learned behaviour, so therefore we can change them. But the hardest bit is to identify the habits that need changing. So we've got to really think, actually. We've got to sit down and really think about it. Think about, why is it that every third cycle in my dishwasher, it doesn't clean properly? Oh, I know. It's because I put certain dishes in a certain way and they're not clean. Something. Oh, why is it I trip over in the bathroom when I didn't used to? Oh, I know. I've got bigger towels and they're too big and I'm tripping over them when I'm getting out of the bath or shower. We have to really think, what is it that is stopping me do something or harming me? Or because the thing is, you see, with the habits, they clearly are habits because they were rewarding at one point in time. And because they're rewarding and they're all wonderfully ensconced in the reward circuitry in the brain, that behavior we repeat because of the reward circuitry. So we keep repeating it becomes a habit, therefore it becomes unconscious, we file it away and we keep doing it. But we get to a point where that habit no longer serves us. And it's identifying it when it no longer serves us that is the tough bit. So it could be either it's no longer rewarding, we just do it on automatic and we don't even aware that we've just had our fifth glass of wine. We're just on this automatic roller coaster. Identifying what it is that is this empty habit that no longer serves us in terms of either the pleasure it gives us or in terms of it harming us, because we all know that excess chemicals in our food, excess alcohol and so on and so forth is not good for us. So once we've identified that, then we can do something about it. And the way to do something about it is to find a replacement that you enjoy. So if you find a replacement that you enjoy doing, and that's the key, you have to enjoy it so that you want to repeat the behavior. Again, we're associated now with the reward circuitry. So we want to repeat that behavior, and then we can repeat it, and then that becomes a habit to displace the other one. Now, that habit, the original habit, is still tucked away in the striatum, which is in the deep part of the brain, which drives habit. But it doesn't actually go away. We've still got that neural pathway. It doesn't disappear, but it will gradually. The replacement habit will become stronger because we keep repeating it, and that's how we actually change the habits.
I've got a question for you. Why does every McDonald's look the same? It's because it's a cue, it's a trigger. All big fast food companies deliberately standardize their stores, their branding, their architecture, so that everything is a constant cue to trigger your eating habits. Then the foods are specifically engineered to deliver immediate rewards. The fries, for example, now they're designed to disintegrate the moment they hit your tongue. They designed to increase the sensation with a quick hit of salt and fat. This, as you will discover in coming days, lights up the pleasure center in your brain. It fires up your dopamine and locks in the habit, hopefully for them, for good. Now, sure that when you're writing in your journal on the habit loop pages, some of the cues that you may have and that you may have written were about being hungry, or you may have written down that it was just convenience. You were filling your car with petrol and the chocolate bar was right next to the counter. That convenience, or what I also call the environment, is something we're going to be talking about a lot in coming days. You see, making better food choices is far easier when you have what you need on hand and when on day 15 we do start to make changes to the food it is that you're eating, being prepared with healthy food alternatives, when that hungry monster does attack you or that cue happens, it's going to be much, much easier to create new habits. You see, it's hard to create new habits in the face of those repeating cues. You might choose to walk a different way to work to avoid your favorite fast food chain. Or you may even go to a different supermarket to avoid all of your old cues. Let me tell you two true stories to get this point across a little bit. In the Vietnamese War, a lot of the soldiers got addicted to drugs, in particular into heroin, and you can kind of understand that, a terrible war at the war front, but they all became, not all, but many of them became addicted to heroin. But when those same soldiers returned home years later, most of them gave up the habit. Now here's the interesting thing. Normally, heroin addicts, even after rehab, 90%, 9 out of 10, when they go back into their old environment, take up that habit again. It's really, really sad, but the environment that you're in drives habits. But those Vietnamese soldiers who are in a totally different environment quite easily then kicked the habit. Now sadly, I've got a real close friend who had the same with one of his sons, and he was in and out of centres to try and help him kick his drug addiction. But the second he went back into the same environment, it was almost impossible, because the cues were there, the same cues as before, became almost impossible to kick the habit. So your environment is very, very important, and what we're going to do over coming weeks is look at how we can tweak the environment to make things better. Anyway, that's enough on habits for today. For now, all I really need is for you to interact with your journal. And next time you get a cue to eat something that maybe you think's a bit unhealthy, what I want you to do is still eat it, but write down all of your feelings. If you don't do this vital step, it's going to be more challenging to reprogram a habit. If you don't do this vital step, it's going to be much more challenging to reprogram your habits to healthy ones, and we're going to really struggle to change your relationship with food. I promise you, if you really write down your feelings, you will be able to regain your health and get your body weight to exactly where you want it to be. I want to now relook at something we talked about on Monday, and that is why calories in and calories out simply don't work. I want to introduce you to a biological function that many people haven't heard of, and it's called homeostasis. Sadly, there are many outdated, horrendous myths about weight loss that still, sadly today, carry some weight. They are convenient myths for the food and pharmaceutical industry, who I believe do everything they can to keep those myths alive. But they are nothing more than that. They are just myths. And Einstein said the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results. But sadly, that's what millions of people do each year. Both science and history now proves that the traditional diet methods do not work. And in fact, it was those traditional diets that kept me fat for over 25 years. Eat less, move more. It just doesn't work at a biological level. It can't work. And I'll explain that throughout this reset. Calories in, calories out. Similar to the first myth, but that now means that you've got to analyze and measure everything you eat. You've got to become an accountant while cooking. That's turning something that should be fun and enjoyable into a chore. Counting calories does not work, period. What about eat a low-fat diet? Really? That's like telling you to turn your back on the diet that's helped us survive as a species for over 2 million years. No, there has to be a different answer. And that is what you're going to learn throughout the reset. A method that works not just in the short term, but for the rest of your life. And the best thing of all, you're going to love it. I promise you're going to love it. Now, I want to explain why all those diets that I've just mentioned, all those myths, simply cannot work. And it's all down to something called homeostasis. My good friend, Dr. Jason Fung, who wrote the Obesity Code, and he also wrote the Diabetes Code, he says that since hormones control both calories in and calories out, obesity is a hormonal, not a calorie disorder. And he says that the key assumptions in the calorie reduction theory of weight loss have all been proven false. He also goes on to say, all calories are not equally likely to cause weight gain. And he says that the entire calorie obsession was a 50-year dead end. If calorie restrictions work, if the theory of eat less, move more was correct, then surely it would be dead easy to create an experiment, like with real people, humans, not rats, to prove the point. It would be, wouldn't it? It'd be so easy. Well, in fact, the experiment has been done. In fact, it was done back in 1919 at the Carnegie Institute in Washington. Wow, Washington. Isn't that where their presidents are based? What did they do? Well, overweight volunteers went on a calorie-restricted diet, which was 30% lower than their regular intake. Kind of the same drop that many calorie-restricted diets currently recommend. Now, guess what happened? The average participant dropped the calories they burnt by the same 30% of their calorie restriction. And what do you think that meant? Well, it meant no weight loss. We call this homeostasis. It's your body's built-in machinery to try and balance energy in with energy out. You see, your body's super smart. It doesn't want to die. And remember, it's in fact your brain's number one job, which is survival. As you have less energy coming in, your brain slows down your heart rate, it lowers your blood pressure. Your body also gets colder because heating it uses a lot of energy. Your brain slows down and you lose the ability to concentrate. With less energy coming in, you have less energy for movement, so you feel lethargic. And as energy is needed to replace your hair and your nails, well, they stop growing. No, restricting calories is not the answer. Let's say you regularly eat about 3,000 calories a day. Now, what about if you drop them by a few hundred calories every day? Well, if you do, your body's going to try and drop the energy that you expend by the very same amount. This is your body's primal survival instinct. It's called homeostasis. And this is why people on a calorie-restricted diet always say that they feel tired or lousy and depressed. It's also why they hardly ever lose any weight in the long term. And that is because homeostasis makes it impossible to do that. You're simply wired that way. Your body's designed to shut things down to survive if it has restricted energy coming in. This is the law of homeostasis. Cut calories and you're going to feel lousy. You're going to feel cold. You're going to have a foggy brain. You're going to have little energy. You're going to be unhappy and depressed and irritable. Oh, and hungry, which then makes you hangry. And yes, hangry is a real thing. Let me introduce a number, a measurement that gets talked about a lot in weight loss. And it's called base metabolic rate, or BMR. And that is how much energy you use, how many calories you use by just being alive. It's how much energy you need to sleep and then sit on the sofa all day long. It's the energy that we use to keep our heart pumping and to maintain our brain and our lungs, etc. Now, everyone is different. Your BMR is different to my BMR. Some people, by the way, don't call it BMR, they just call it your metabolic rate. In fact, you hear it a lot. You hear people saying, I'm overweight because I've got a slow metabolism. Come on, have you ever heard somebody say that? I bet you've probably even said that yourself from time to time. But the strange thing, you know, is actually this. The truth is that when you're overweight, you actually have a higher metabolism than somebody that is slender, because as we're overweight, we have more need to pump blood around the body. So our metabolism, if anything, at that point is actually higher. Now, one of the reasons why you can't outrun a poor diet is called compensation. The more exercise you do, the more your body will demand to be fed. Compensation is the law of homeostasis. It's all about balance. You see, if you just do a big workout, or you just finished a long jog or a long cycle or an exercise class, your body will demand to be fed. It will demand to be compensated. It's actually why they call exercise working up an appetite. A study of 538 students at Harvard University looked at how much energy they lost on days of exercise. And the research showed the opposite effect of what you might expect. You see, for every hour of exercise they did, on average, they consumed an extra 292 calories. I keep mentioning this, but this is the law of homeostasis. Well, actually, it's not a law, but a biological principle. And it's as simple as this. Energy in equals energy out. Increased calories out means increased calories in. It's all true. This is what really happens in your body. You can't out-exercise a bad diet, or as our good friend Dr. Asim Malhotra says, you can't out-exercise your fork. Reduce calories in, reduce calories out. In fact, let's hear from Dr. Asim Malhotra right now.
Famous chap you might have heard of. He's a colleague, a friend, an inspiration, Timothy Noakes. And he says, if you have to exercise to keep your weight down, your diet is wrong.
Right, very good point. Yeah, very good point. Very true. I mean, that is it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you
Simple
can't
as that.
outrun a bad diet. That's the other thing, right? You can't outrun a bad diet.
Yeah.
I counted calories for 25 years, and it took all the fun out of eating for me. And you know what? I just got fatter and fatter, and it's hence why my book was called Fat and Furious. I was fat for so many years, and I'm furious with all that counting calories that it was a complete waste of time. And as you're going to learn, your body utilizes the calories it receives, the energy it receives from carbohydrates, fat and protein in different ways. For example, petrol and diesel are both forms of energy, but put the wrong one in the wrong engine, and what does it do? It breaks down. It doesn't work properly. If we want to derive some useful measurements out of calories, let's look at them from a totally different angle. Okay, here's a question. How many calories are in 1 pound of body weight, or 1 pound of body fat? It's 3,500, or 7,700 if you measure things in kilograms. Okay, the next question. How quickly did you really put on all that weight? Now come on, be honest. Think about it for a moment. I mean, it wasn't like you woke up yesterday a bit like Tim Allen playing Scott Kelvin in the Santa Claus movie, where he falls off the roof and then the next day he wakes up and he's Santa Claus. Literally overnight his stomach grows and grows and grows. No, that didn't happen, did it? Let me guess that you probably put on 2 to 3 pounds in weight every year. Now, don't get me wrong, some people can put on a lot more than that. But on average, across our country, and the same in America, the average weight gain of somebody that's overweight or obese is around about 2 pounds a year. So 2 pounds a year is 2 stone in about 15 years. Or if you were putting it on a little bit faster at, say, 3 pounds a year, that would be about putting 2 stone of body weight on in about 10 years. Does that kind of sound right? Was that about where you were? Well, think of it another way. £2 a year is just 7,000 extra calories of body fat. And if it was all about calories in, that would mean that the average person was eating, let me work this out, about 20 calories too much each day. just 20 calories each day. Now, I don't think that's the case, do you? I mean, come on, that's like a quarter of a mouthful of chocolate. No. You and I both know that's not true. We both know that most likely you were overeating by several hundred calories, maybe even 1,000 calories every day. But even if it was just, say, I don't know, 150 calories a day, which it wasn't, but let's say you were only eating 150 extra calories every day. Well, over 10 years, you'd have put on about 10 stone. That didn't happen though, did it? That didn't. But let's say you were overeating by more likely 1,000 calories a day, which is statistically what a lot of people in our country do. A lot of people in our country are overeating by about 1,000 calories each and every day. And if it was all about calories in and calories out, that would mean that the average adult was putting on about 7 stones every year, or 70 stones every 10 years. Now, that obviously hasn't happened to you, otherwise you wouldn't be here today, nor would I. No, that didn't happen. And it couldn't happen because homeostasis kicked in. You see, you were overeating quite a lot. And because you were overeating quite a lot, homeostasis kicked in. What did it do? Well, it put up your heart rate to burn more energy. It put your body temperature up to burn more energy, and you probably sweated a lot more. You've probably experienced high blood pressure because by putting the high blood pressure up, it burns excess energy. And the fatter you became, the more energy you needed to burn off because of homeostasis. Does this all make sense? It's about homeostasis. It's not about counting calories. Now, the same is true on your new journey to losing weight. If you just cut the calories, you won't lose the weight by the same equation. If the maths work correctly, let's say if you go from 3,000 calories a day to 2,000 calories a day, that 1,000 calorie deficit taken, that a pound of body fat equals 3,500 calories, means in a year you would lose 104 pounds. That's over 7 stone in 1 year. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible. It can be done. And I've worked with people that have even lost more weight than that, dramatic weight loss. But it's not done by reducing calories. If you just reduce calories, your energy will drop by a similar amount. That's homeostasis. I hope this is all now making some sense. They might say, well, what about fasting? Does that not work? Maybe you've read my book or heard others talking about fasting for weight loss. Now, fasting is very, very different, and we'll cover it later in the reset. But just quickly right now, when you fast successfully, which by the way, you're not ready to do just yet, but when you are ready, when you are able to be what we call metabolically flexible, which is what we're aiming to do, in fact, you will be there by the end of your 6th week. When you fast, you don't become hungry at all. You can even go 3, 4, or 5 days without feeling hungry in the slightest. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? But it's true. And later I'm going to teach you how to do that. So, if you were to reduce your incoming energy at the moment, homeostasis kicks in and reduces your outgoing energy. But once you become metabolically flexible, and by the end of week 6, you'll be able to run on 2 different fuel supplies. You're either going to be able to run on your incoming fuel, just as you do today, or you're going to be adapted to be able to fast, and in other words, not eat. And when you do that effectively, you'll be able then to access all of your stored body fat without ever feeling hungry. Your body will then have access to tens of thousands of calories while fasting. Your body will then have access to tens of thousands of calories. And while you're fasting, your body does not drop your outgoing calories, your energy at all. Here's the brilliant Dr. Jason Fung to explain this.
The biggest sort of benefits of fasting, the most obvious, are the weight loss. Its effects on weight loss and type 2 diabetes. So both of them are related conditions. But essentially, when you don't eat, you're forcing the body to use up some of its stores of food energy. So the body can store food energy or calories so that we don't have to eat constantly. So when there's a time that we don't eat, that is when we're fasting, such as overnight. So even when you're sleeping, you're not eating in your sleep. So therefore, you have to rely on your body's own sources of stored food calories. The body sort of stores calories in two ways, sugar and fat. So if you have too much fat or if you have too much sugar, then those are conditions that are going to be helped by increasing the amount of fasting that you do, because when you don't eat, your body's going to have to use up the body fat or use up the body sugar. And when you do that, the sugar falls, which is good if you're type 2 diabetic. And if you're trying to lose weight, your body's going to use up some body fat. And everybody always, for some reason, thinks it's such an unnatural thing to do, but that's precisely the reason that we have body fat, is so that we have this store of energy. So we're using it for precisely what it was designed to be used for. It's not something unusual and, weird and stuff. It's been used for thousands of years. It's actually the sole purpose of body fat is to act as a store of calories. And it's a very efficient store of calories. So if you have too much, use it. That's all we're saying. If you're too thin, on the other hand, so if you have malnourishment, if you're underweight, or if nutrition is very important, like if you're a child or if you're pregnant and so on, then that may not be the time to do extended fast. But the point is that we are supposed to cycle between feeding, when our body is storing calories, and fasting, when our body is using those calories that we store. So if you maintain a nice balance between the two, feeding and fasting, your weight's going to stay relatively stable. But if all of a sudden you start to only feed and you stop the fasting, then you're basically just, the calories are going into storage, but they're not coming out. So it's no wonder that you're going to gain weight over time, because you didn't give your body enough time to use the calories that you've stored. And that's all. It's not something weird, unusual. So if you look at the English language, for example, breakfast, it's the meal that breaks your fast. You can't break a fast if you're not fasting. So it means that the language itself actually, acknowledges that you have to be fasting. It's part of a natural day's life. Even the French, for example, it also means the same thing. It's, to fast, déjeuner, to break a fast.
Talked a lot today about habits, we've talked about homeostasis. I kind of really hope you enjoyed those two subjects. Please, please, please do use those habit charts in your journal. It's really going to help us change some of your eating habits. And let me finish one final thought around habits. Weight loss is a bit more tricky than helping someone quit smoking or quit drugs or alcohol, where all of those, the process is built around abstinence. You see, you can't completely abstain from eating food for the rest of your life. Therefore, what we've got to do is help you create new habits. Here's the awesome Eric talking about this very subject.
It's not just the food manufacturers, it's us. And now it's us going to the store and buying what they're making. And every time we buy what they're making, we support them to sell more of that. Now, I think inside that, the profit-driven nature of the food industry has also become unbelievably evil. I mean, I think the food industry is significantly more manipulative and evil than the tobacco industry ever was. The tobacco industry was just saying, hey, take this thing that's obviously bad for you and make it sexy and cool. I mean, the food industry is saying, take this substance, which is you need, which you have no choice about, you've got to eat, and let's like diminish its nutritional quality, because then you'll have to eat more. And let's add these these chemically addictive things like caffeine and sugar, so you'll lose your own sense of freedom and you won't even be able to choose for yourself anymore. And then let's hire the best psychologists in the world and develop marketing campaigns that will write so deep into your subconscious that you won't be able to get through Easter without a Cadbury cream egg.
Well done on getting towards the end of day 3. I'm really proud of you. You're doing brilliantly. Keep using that journal for the rest of the day. Try and analyze those habits that you've got. And tomorrow, we're going to learn a little bit about something I call the gremlin.
How did you find that day? Fascinating, isn't it? Now, don't forget, the first 7 days are completely free, but if you want to get onto the full program, we have 49 days like what you've just experienced. And we really go through chapter and verse, everything that you need to know to lose that weight and keep it off for good. What do you get when you sign up? Well, you get a blood glucose monitor so you can learn about your own body, what works for you and what doesn't in terms of food. You get a cookbook with loads of great recipes and access, of course, to the app with even more. You get a printed version of the journal. So with the printed version of the journal, you can really interact with all the different things and so on and so forth, and learn and really make notes from each day and really understand what's going on. You get lifetime membership. So as we change any of those 49 videos, as new evidence or new research comes out or new doctors with new ideas, we'll update it and let you know that we've made changes. You'll get a copy of my book, you get supplements, you get so many different things, all for £149. Whenever you're ready, just click the link above and get yourself onto the full program.